All right, good afternoon to everyone. Uh, Nice to see those of you who are attending us with us live here. I like to see more and more of you coming into class during the live sessions so that we can, maybe have a little bit more discussion. Um, Hello to all of you watching on the online archive as well. Hope everybody's doing well. It's Monday afternoon here in very rainy San Francisco. I am back in my apartment after 2 weeks of being displaced due to electrical work. So I am happy to be back. I'm not exactly in my own office yet because like that's still a work in progress, but things are coming back to normal. So I'm excited about that. In today's class, we are going to be continuing the discussion of the relationship between structure and agency. As we have discussed, this is a very fundamental question within sociology and sociological theory. Basically, is the question about the relationship between our free will, our choices, our personal responsibility on the one hand, and on the other hand, the way that society or, economics or culture, kind of shapes us from the outside by these kind of structural forces. And so everyone in sociology kind of agrees that structure and agency are both important. The question is kind of about the balance between them, or the relationship between them. And so we have a number of different ways in which sociologists have tried to understand the relationship between structure and agency. We've talked about a few of them on Wednesday. Today, we will be focusing more on the work of Anthony Giddens, and what he has called structuration theory. Structuration is, I believe, a very kind of awkward word. It's hard to say. It's one that Anthony Giddens kind of invented in order to kind of bring these two sides of the coin together, structure and agency, to show how they are kind of related. So that's going to be kind of the bulk of the class today. As far as nuts and bolts, like the course itself, you have, as I posted last week, a second writing exercise that is due, I believe, on February 23rd, a week from today. It basically just asks you to reflect on your own experiences and background in terms of these questions of structure and agency, kind of like personal choice versus, social determinacy, and also your relationship with institutions. Institutions are going to be the main topic that we talk about probably starting on Wednesday and going into next week. And so there's a kind of a natural progression from talking about structure and agency to talking about the role of institutions in social life. So that probably we will not get to today, certainly will not get to today, but we'll probably begin to at least sink our teeth into that starting on Wednesday. The other nuts and bolts announcement, as you may know, I've been having some technical issues with Perusal. I think that they're all straightened out now. A few of you had, various kinds of issues that you had emailed me about with the perusal sort of technology, the learning management system. I'm very grateful for you being patient with me while I tried to figure those things out. I think that they are all squared away now. Everybody should have credit, like grades that are commensurate with the work that you did on perusal. I think everything is straightened out, but it's very important that if you see something that doesn't look right, or you feel like you haven't been adequately, had your work like counted in some way, please do reach out to me via email so that I can investigate this. This is only my second semester using Perusal. It's still something that I'm kind of getting used to. It's still something there are certain kind of like nooks and crannies of the technology that I don't entirely understand. I've learned a lot more just from having to kind of troubleshoot what you all have been coming to me about. So for most of you, this has not been a problem at all. But there's been a couple of you that had to, get in touch with me about, these kind of like technological things. So thank you for staying patient. I'm very grateful for that on your part. I would like to kick off our discussion of structure and agency with a new poll that I devised today. I'm kind of getting more into this kind of polling thing. I feel like it's a good way, hopefully, to kind of like stimulate some discussion. And it also, kind of mirrors the sociological method. One thing that sociologists do is we do surveys, and we do surveys about people's opinions and beliefs and actions. And so, I'm trying to not just be a sociology instructor here, but actually model what doing sociological research looks like in sort of microcosm. All right, so let's go to the poll. Where can I get this? Okay, now these are 6 questions that ask you to score on a scale of 1 to 10 these 6 statements. They all have to do with different questions about basically like structure and agency. They're things that you all can should be able to answer for yourselves. It's a little tricky for those of you who are watching the online archive. I'm going to try to share my screen. I've gotten feedback that actually people are not able to see these polls if they're watching the online archive. So I'm going to try to make that happen by sharing my screen here. Can you all see that? Can someone just give me a thumbs up in the live session if you can see the poll? Thank you, Skeeter. Okay, where to go? Hold on a second. I lost it. Hold on. Where to go? Oh, hold on. There. Okay. So I know some of you can. So if you're here in the live session, please do, throw in your opinion here. I know I see that there are like 6 or 7 of you. Um, so this is basically just asking you on a scale of 1 to 10 to rank these. I guess there's a 0 option too. I didn't see that. So for those of you who are watching on the archive, the 6 questions are number one, they're not questions, they're more like statements, and you assess whether you agree or you disagree with them on a scale of 1 to 10. Number one is personal choices are a major factor in why people remain in poverty. Number two is individuals are a product of biological and hereditary makeup, like their genes. Number three is individuals are a product of their social upbringing, like their family, community, or socioeconomic background. Number four is individuals should meet their own basic needs, not depend on the government. Number five is people are mostly responsible for making their own choices about how they think and act. And number six is, do you believe that you are the ultimate author of your actions, or are they determined by factors beyond your control? For this one, the scale is, if you put 0, it means like I am the ultimate author. And if you put closer to 10, you say it's out of my control. Like I said, I hope that you can all see that. These, and so for those of you who are live in the session, please do respond to the poll. I can't see your responses, so they're totally anonymous. Maybe I should have mentioned that earlier. So it's a totally anonymous poll. And just the more data we have here, even though there's only like 6 of you, the more data we have here, the more we can kind of talk about it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about each of these real briefly. And I encourage any of you who are, um, attending the live Zoom session here to sort of like weigh in, especially if you want to talk about why you answered it in a certain kind of way. Personal choices are a major factor in why people remain in poverty. We have pretty split results here. Couple of people one person strongly agree, one person strongly disagree, and like 3 people kind of more like in the middle. This is something I think I took this question from a different survey poll, where they asked this question of Americans in general, and about 60% of people agree with this statement that personal choices are a major factor of why people remain in poverty. It's obviously an important issue because, like, the degree to which we provide social assistance or welfare to poor people kind of depends on the degree to which, like, people hold them responsible for their own condition. So if you think that, poor people it's basically poor people's own fault that they're poor, then you're like less inclined to, support welfare or other kinds of public assistance because you feel like, people should basically pick themselves up by by their own bootstraps. If you feel like these are things that are kind of out of people's control, then it's like, well, then we want to basically provide a kind of a boost so that people can, kind of like help themselves. This question also like strongly correlates to what political party people belong to. So people who are on the right side of the political spectrum and who are, vote with the Republican Party are more likely to agree with this statement that personal choices are a major factor in why people remain in poverty, while people who are more on the left side of the political spectrum and tend to vote for the Democratic Party, they are more likely to disagree with this statement. So again, this is something I took from an actual survey of Americans to sort of see, where people kind of fall on the spectrum, and how it sort of correlates with their political view. In terms of the structure and agency question, it's really important, because, like, in terms of the structure thing, if you think that poverty is mostly the result of social determinants or people's economic background or their circumstances, their family, community, et cetera, then you favor a kind of a more structuralist kind of approach. Whereas the approach that emphasizes agency is going to emphasize like that people are kind of like responsible for their own condition, for their own situation, and therefore like they have like no one except for themselves to blame for their own plight. Go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, I think like, it's hard to kind of agree with that one just based off everything we've been learning. Just due to like, like structural inequalities, and like structural barriers and everything like that. Um, I I don't know, like I just think like it's really hard to just think that, yeah, people should just, life's unfair, whatever, but just like figure it out. We're all equal, and I don't really think, like it's really like that, like there are a lot of barriers that people face,
Yeah.
that are like outside of their control, like your environment where you grew up. And like if you see everyone around you, like if you go to a school that's just like, like not the best schools, and like you have like a like family who don't like, kind of not support you, but like, yeah, support you, and then you see everyone around you just like it's hard to overcome that, like of course in like the ideal world, yeah, like there's opportunity for everyone, but like perspective matters, and like if you can't see if everyone around you isn't doing it, then it's hard to overcome that.
I wholeheartedly agree, Kai. As do, I would say, the majority, maybe the vast majority of sociologists and social scientists. Most sociologists are likely to disagree with this statement, and more likely to emphasize the social, economic, and cultural and political um, factors that go into why a person is more likely, why people remain in poverty. Uh, Sociologists are much more likely than the average American to disagree with this statement. And I think probably part of the reason is that when we look at poverty, in our day-to-day life, like say, we see homeless encampments in San Francisco, for example. Um, People the like it's like the symptoms are more visible than the causes. Do you know what I mean? Like people see, what has, kind of like what's happening in terms of the poverty or people being unhoused or maybe people, struggling with, drug addiction or mental health issues, but they don't see, but like the causes, the root causes of those problems are invisible to people, at least in the immediate kind of moment.
Yeah,
They
I feel like it's like easier for people to like, you kind of just see them and you're just like, oh, that's crazy, and then like you just go about your life. I think like
uh,
no, like you have to know their story. You have to know like you said, the causes and like I think it's really vast, and I think people just I don't know, don't care enough. They just kind of want them away from them, which is like messed up, but I
yeah,
think it's the reality.
yeah, and I think like the sociological lesson to be learned here is kind of that structure is harder to see. That the structure part of structure and agency is like a lot of times like less visible to us. The way that you said, like we don't see like what that person went through or where that person came from or the trauma that's been inflicted on that person or the various forms of like discrimination or other barriers that have been thrown into that person's life. We just see kind of like the end result, the symptom. We don't really see like the root cause. Yeah. Thank you, Kai. I wholeheartedly agree with your assessment and things, and kind of the danger of this is that we end up kind of like blaming the victim. So the second question, individuals are a product of their biological and hereditary makeup, like their genes. So this is something that like biologists and a lot of probably some psychologists would also kind of agree with. And it looks like we've got a pretty strong amount of agreement here, at least in, those of you who are willing to sort of take the poll. Generally speaking, sociologists tend to emphasize like the social over the biological. Um, but that's kind of like, it's kind of like why we're sociologists instead of biologists, like we think like the social matters, the environment, the community, a person's family, the economic opportunities that they have or they don't have. We tend to think that those things are more important as far as structural causes, than sort of biology. But it's a long-standing debate, perhaps a debate that doesn't really have an answer. Um, the third question, we also had pretty strong agreement with. In fact, actually, even a little stronger, which is what I would expect given the fact that this is a sociology class. That individuals are a product of their social upbringing, like their family, community, or socioeconomic background. We had pretty strong agreement overall with this statement, as I would kind of expect, and frankly, as I would kind of hope for, given that we're in a sociology class. I would hope that by now you've come to see that like social upbringing really matters quite a lot for people's lives. If not in this class, then in other sociology classes that you've taken, hopefully you've come around to, at least somewhat agreeing with this. And if not, you may want to like change your major or something because like this is a pretty fundamental, kind of belief that's borne out by a lot of research, by a lot of social science. Basically, says like what kind of family you were raised in, what kind of community you were raised in,
what your socioeconomic background is, those things matter a lot. They may not like explain everything. They may not, totally, absolutely determine a person's life, but they're really strong influences. And that's, the kind of like premise number one of sociology. Um, Number four, individuals should meet their own basic needs, not depend on the government. So this is another thing that's kind of related to the question about poverty. Like in American society, there's a strong element of what's sometimes called like self-reliant individualism, or the idea that people are basically responsible for their own fate, and therefore if they're getting welfare or some other kind of subsidy, that's kind of like a handout or a free lunch. And people should not kind of like depend on the government, but that they should strongly meet their own basic needs. I would say that most sociologists are inclined to strongly disagree with this statement, um, and probably more so than the average American population. I think sociologists who study these kinds of things, like sociologists who study poverty, generally tend to come to the conclusion that poverty is the result of socioeconomic factors, and therefore some kind of government social programs are necessary in order to alleviate poverty and give individuals a kind of a boost, a chance to be more successful in the society. That is not something that all sociologists necessarily agree with, but I would say probably 80 to 90% of sociologists would probably agree with that. Whereas among Americans in general, it's probably more like 50-50. And again, it strongly correlates with political party and political ideology. So people on the right side of the spectrum are more likely to agree with this statement, and people on the left side of the political spectrum are more likely to disagree. Um, the last two questions I asked are a more general kind of like existential questions, um, and not so like political, but more along the lines of like free will, the question of free will. And I tried to pose these last two questions in different ways. The first question is like posed in terms of like people in general. And then the sixth question is more like about you yourself, right? So the first question, like people are mostly responsible for making their own choices about how they think and act. All right. So we have pretty strong agreement here, like that people are, for the most part, like, they're responsible. Like people, are in the driver's seat, and making the decisions in their own lives, and therefore, kind of responsible for them. It's interesting that it seems maybe a little bit more. There's in the sixth question, though, when I ask about you yourself, there seems to be a little bit more sense of like that things are determined by factors beyond your control. So two of you, strongly agreed, with the idea that like you that the things that you do, your actions, are determined by factors beyond your control. And whereas with other people, people were more likely to think that other people are responsible for making their own choices about how they think and act. But when it comes to yourself, you're more likely to think that these are determined by factors beyond your control. Very, very interesting. I don't know what exactly that says. I mean, and it's a small sample size, but I tried to pose these kinds of questions to get you to try to think in two different ways. One about other people and one about yourself. Um, yeah, and it doesn't really specify like what are the factors beyond your control. They could be, I mean, like here in the Bay Area, I know a lot of people that really believe in astrology, for example. Like they believe, that like the way we think and act is somehow kind of related to like the stars and the moon and like, all the stuff that's going on up in space. Um, so there's a lot of ways that we could kind of attribute some sort of structural power to these larger things in a way that like minimizes our own agency. I'm gonna kind of end the poll here and let's see. Okay, so I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of like the stakes of this question about structure and agency. Um, just like why this is an important question for sociologists and what kinds of things that we're trying to suss out when we're thinking about the relationship between structure and agency. This question of like personal responsibility and free will and like how much are we really the authors of our own actions versus like how much are we kind of the product of circumstances and forces that are like beyond our control, you know um, so it's sort of these kinds of questions are really at the heart of sociology as a field. It's interesting before we dive into the readings to think about how this is different from the other social sciences like economics and psychology. With economics, they generally think that people have a lot of free will and a lot of choice. In fact, a lot of economics is all about like how do we choose to spend our money? How do we choose, what kind of career to pursue? How do we choose, what kinds of things to buy on, Amazon or at Target or, whatever, what are our consumer choices? Or, how do we choose to spend our money or perhaps like save and invest our money? Economics is all presupposes actually a lot of choice. Psychology presupposes a certain amount of choice, but also suggests that like that there are things that we all reckon with, like in our families, that we don't have control over. We don't have control over whether we were born into a healthy, nurturing family or an abusive family, or a dysfunctional family. We don't have control over a lot of like traumatic things that happen in our lives, but that leave an imprint on our psyche. We don't really have control over like how our mom and dad were, or we don't isn't even necessarily have control over like our genetic makeup of our consciousness and our psyche, our maybe even like our personality is shaped by things that are kind of like beyond our realm of agency, beyond our realm of choice. Um, Sociologists tend to be on that side of things, that like people are kind of not as in charge as they like to think they are, right? Like that we are ultimately shaped by forces that are beyond our control in ways that we often don't even understand. You know, go ahead, Kai.
Do you think that's where that idea of like people don't have free will comes from?
Yeah, I mean, this is a long-standing philosophical debate that goes way back to the origins of philosophy in ancient Greece, itself. Yeah, I think that people have been kind of debating this for a long time, and not just like do people have free will or not, but also like if they don't have free will, like what are the things that are really driving people? Is it their hereditary makeup? Is it their genes, their biology? Or is it these kind of like psychological things, these things that happened to them before they were 5 years old, that happened within their family, and their people are still like caught in a loop from things that happened when they were children. That's a lot of like psychology, right? Kind of is based on that premise. Or in sociology, it's like, oh well, people are really shaped by their community and their class and the race that they're born into, or the ethnic group that they're born into, or by gender, or by these larger kind of structural social factors, especially social inequalities. So the real question about like if we don't have free will, then like what's really in charge? Like what's shaping us if we're not the ones who are in the driver's seat? So yeah,
That's a
really good.
scary thought.
Yeah, no, that's why sociology is kind of scary. It's like it's just like we kind of think we're the author. What
Right,
is it that young people today say, like people think that they're the main character?
right, right.
Yeah. People think that they're the ones that are like in the driver's seat making things happen. And maybe there's actually like something else pulling our strings, you know?
It's
You
like
know, like
what like it's like those like when you make a decision and like I'm a very indecisive person. I'm like, oh, I should have did this, I should have did that. But then, when you hear that, it's like, well, I guess I did what like based off of like like, who I am, my genetic makeup and where I come from and all those stuff. Like,
yeah.
I guess I made the best decision that I could for myself at the time.
Yeah. Right. Like you don't want to go too far in the direction of like, thinking of yourself as like just a puppet, because like, we all have to make choices, and we all have to be like kind of responsible for the choices that we make. I liked the way that we talked about it last week, which was like this metaphor of the menu. Like basically we don't get to decide what's on the menu, but we get to choose based on what's like
Yeah,
the options we have available,
yeah.
you
Because
know?
it's still like, I guess that's where like agency comes in, like our
Yeah.
ability to like view the options that like are in front of us and then like make, like act on those options that we see, I guess. So like I guess, going back to the whole menu thing, so I guess we are in the driver's seat, but something's pulling at the wheel, like you said.
Yeah. The driving thing may not be the greatest metaphor now that I think of it. I kind of like this menu thing. It's like, yeah, that's describes the structure and agency relationship. Like the, the menu is like the structure. Like none of us, had a choice in what kind of like socioeconomic family we were born into, or what our race or gender is. We don't. Those are things that are out of our control. And the fact that we we're born into a society where that's so unequal, in all sorts of ways. We don't. that's just on the menu. But we have choices about how to act, what we can do given the range of options that are available to us, you know. And so I kind of like that metaphor that we were kind of toying around with in Wednesday's class, you know. Um, I like the thing that Marx says too, that people make history, but not under conditions of their own choosing, which is kind of like a similar kind of thing, that people make history, that we are always in the process of changing and transforming the world, and we are creating the world, through our actions. But we don't do it under conditions that we choose. We kind of like inherit these conditions. We inherit this society, and how we choose to act is therefore our kind of like responsibility. You know, we can choose to kind of like go along with the society and try to make as much money or get as much fame as we can, or whatever. We can kind of like go with the flow. Or, we can try to kind of like swim upstream and like go, try to change the society. Or we can, like kind of rebel against what it wants from us and, engage in like non-conforming behavior. I realize that I'm throwing out just a ton of metaphors out there, like swimming upstream and like all this stuff. But like I'm just throwing things out there to see what sticks, like in terms of like um, what helps you understand this question that's really at the heart of sociology, the relationship between structure and agency. Everybody knows that both things matter. The question is like, what is the relationship between them? Yeah. So, when we were looking at the reading last week, we were, kind of going through this introduction kind of gives us an overview of like how different sociological theories have tried to bridge structure and agency in different ways. All right. And so it gives you this overview. Michael Hector, here we talked about last time, as well as James Coleman. They represent more of kind of the rational actor model. The idea that if you want to understand society, you have to start with individuals, and the choices that individuals make are always oriented towards like maximizing their rewards and minimizing their risks. People are always trying to do what is ever in their best interest. Um, you know, I I gave you the poll last week that asked you to think about, like, if you have a decision to make, how you weigh the pros and cons in a kind of a rational way. So Michael Hector and James Coleman suggest that this is the best way to understand social life, is we have a collection of individuals who are all trying to maximize their interests, and that is sort of like what gives society its kind of dynamic. And there are a lot of critics of this model who say that, yeah, in some cases, we do act in this kind of rational way, but not all the time. And in fact, maybe not even most of the time. So, like, sure, I think I used the example of me buying a car last week. When I'm buying a car or engaged in some kind of like economic transaction, I'm always thinking in this kind of like logical, rational, pros and cons, risks and rewards kind of way. But when I'm dealing like with my family, I don't really like weigh things in that way, like, or when I'm, in with my teaching, I don't really like take that approach to my teaching. People are not always oriented towards like efficiency and like being calculating and like maximizing their interests. There are other ways in which people in different situations people act more on the basis of like their emotional ties to people, or they act more in terms of like the values that they hold dear to them. There are plenty of occasions where people feel the need to act on their values even though it doesn't like pay off, and even though like it may actually come with like certain kinds of risks. So people speak out about certain issues, even though, it may cause them to get fired, or it may cause them to, go to jail. Um, many, many people have done this throughout history and continue to do it in our time, thankfully. Um, Sorry, I just need a little water. Um, that people don't always act in this kind of rational way, and if they did act in that kind of rational way all the time, we would call them robots. They would be like lacking in some fundamental humanity, or we would call them like sociopaths. People who are always trying to you know get over on other people in any kind of given situation, and don't who are just always like really calculating, and not like empathetic or feeling. Um, we would call those people sociopaths. Um, so the rational model actor can explain some things. It can explain some behaviors, but it's limited. There are other aspects of human action that it simply cannot explain. Um, a third tradition here comes from this guy Harrison White, and his, as it says here, a common avenue out of the structure-action duality rests on social networks. Okay, so here is another way of trying to bridge structure and agency together, is with the concept of social network. A social network generally is defined as, or refers to, the connections between people, whether it's their work connections, their personal connections, their family connections. A social network is basically the question of like, who do you know? You know, who are you kind of like related to? Who can you, ask for a letter of recommendation, or who can, give you a referral, or who can help introduce you to somebody else. A lot of life, I think, Jill said it maybe last week. A lot of social life comes down to like, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? So social networks are really important in social life, right? Like who you know, for example, is the number one factor in terms of how people get a job. Um, so like spoiler alert, and I hope this doesn't like cause you to devalue your education, but like in terms of how people get jobs in America, it's not necessarily like your education or your GPA or your honors or whatever. It's like who you know. That most people get their job because like somebody knows somebody and they like, pass your name along, or they introduce you to somebody at a party or, on the golf course or whatever, So the social networks that people travel in, are actually more important than anything else. If you want to, get that big job or, whatever it is that you're, striving to do, you should be trying to maximize your social networks, just to get out there and get to know some people. That's really important. So social networks are really especially important in economics because with economics, it's like a lot of our economic choices are based, on like how people that we trust like influence us. So this is why, like for example, influencers online have become such a valuable part of the social network economy. It used to be that if you're trying to sell somebody a product, you put up a billboard or a television commercial or something like that, and we kind of know that is has like limited effectiveness in persuading people. But on the other hand, if your friend uses a certain product and like recommends it to you, or if an online influencer who is like not your friend but somebody that you kind of trust in some way, if they recommend a product, then that is like worth its weight in gold. From a marketing perspective, social networks are really valuable in terms of influencing economic behavior. So this is one place in which like sociology and sociological theory has this real practical um, component to it, as where like how we are kind of like influenced, especially our economic actions, by the people that we know and the social networks that we travel in. Let's see. So let us get then to the final of these four authors who are mentioned here, Anthony Giddens. Let me pull up the Wikipedia page here for Anthony Giddens just to give you a sense of how influential this man is within sociology. Of these four lineages that are mentioned in this chapter, Anthony Giddens is by far the most prominent. He may be the most influential sociologist in the world today. If he's not the most important, he's probably in the top five. He's the kind of person that has influenced not just sociology, but has had an influence in politics, in technology, in questions around climate change. Anthony Giddens, has had especially a big influence in British politics. And as a result of that, he's been sort of nominated into the stratosphere of like the English aristocracy. I don't entirely understand how the English aristocracy works, but he has been deemed a lord. So you see here, this is the right and honorable the Lord Giddens. He was sort of inducted into the House of Lords. I don't entirely understand what that means because I'm not British, and I don't understand how that British like aristocracy works. But suffice it to say that this is a man who's very important and has been celebrated for his sort of contributions in many directions by the English government. He was an advisor to the Labour Party when the Labour Party was in power under Tony Blair in the 1990s. Um, he's the author of, as it says here, at least 34 books, which have been published in 29 languages. Um, Somewhere down here it says he is, yeah, according to the Open Syllabus Project, Giddens is the most frequently cited author on college syllabi for sociology courses. So the person whose readings are and books are most likely to appear on a sociology syllabus. So, needless to say, this tells you something about the importance of Anthony Giddens in our discipline. It's also interesting that he is not a person of privilege, at least in his background, in his family. As it says here, he grew up in a lower middle class family. His father was a clerk, who worked for like the transportation department. Um, he was not in any way, like a private school, boarding school educated, like the kids in Harry Potter or something, like he's, just like a bloke, just like a working class guy and sort of like made his way to the point where he got a master's at the London School of Economics, a PhD at Cambridge, and then his career really kind of took off. So you can read all about Lord Giddens right here. I will probably insist on calling him Lord Giddens just to give a sense of how significant this person is. Um, okay, let's see. So this talks a little bit about his background and the concept that we're going to be focusing on, like for the structure and agency question, is this word structuration, which I think is a really clunky and awkward word um, that I don't recommend using at a dinner party or anything like that. Um, it's not, it doesn't roll off the tongue, structuration. This is kind of an ugly word. But it's meant to kind of explain this interaction between structure and agency. So the thing is that sociologists often, the problem that Giddens is saying that there's a problem with most sociology is that it starts with the idea of society as a finished product. That society is like this thing out there in the world. And he says that that's the wrong way to think about it. Society is not a thing that is a finished product. Society is always in the process of being made and remade. So that's where the Asian part of structuration, which implies like a process, that there is a continual ongoing process of structuration that we are in our interactions, in our day-to-day life, us people are continually creating and remaking society, transforming society. So this is kind of like his first, most like kind of original point is that we have to account for the creative role of human agency in creating this thing we call the social structure. So there's like a symbiotic relationship, or you could say like a reciprocal relationship between structure and agency. We are always creating the structure, and the structure is always creating us, you know, and you have to kind of understand that these things are like structure and agency, they're not the same thing, but they're not separable. You know, they are locked into a relationship with one another. They are inseparable entities, two sides of a coin. And so he is trying to understand how these things are related. So this is the work that he put together in the book that we're going to be reading from, which is called The New Rules of Sociological Method. Just like the title sounds, what he is trying to do in this book is lay out a method for what sociologists should do. What should sociologists study? What should their method be? What should they focus on and analyze? The title of this book is a play on words from the original book, which is called The Rules of Sociological Method, which was written by Emile Durkheim in 1895. So Emile Durkheim, who is like this founding figure, this kind of like on the Mount Rushmore of who sociology's founding fathers were. Um, Emile Durkheim wrote this book where he basically laid out what sociologists should do, how they should research, what they should study. That was in 1895. Anthony Giddens comes along later in 1976 and writes this book that he calls The New Rules of Sociological Method. So it's deliberately like a callback to Durkheim's book, and basically like saying that what he's doing is kind of an extension of that. So let's see. All right. So as he says here, his point is that although action and structure are usually seen as opposing concepts, they are actually two sides of the same coin and cannot be analyzed separately. On the one side, agency is given meaningful form only through the generative schemes of structure. On the other side, we can say that structures are maintained and transformed only through action. So this is what he means by like that these things are not the same, but they're usually seen as like opposing concepts, but we really need to see them as interrelated in the sense of being two sides of a coin. So this is basically like describing what we'll be looking at in the next class, which is where we'll be kind of like diving more into the text itself. Um, and so this would be a good place for you to continue to refer back to, because I will be honest with you, Giddens is hard to understand. Even I have to read him two or three times to really grasp what he's saying. So if I have to do that, I imagine you're probably struggling with the reading too. That's okay. Like this is like you're supposed to struggle with these readings. It's kind of like going to the gym. No pain, no gain. You know, like you got to struggle to really like learn this stuff. Um, you're not just gonna like sit down and bench press 500 pounds right on the spot. It's like a kind of thing that's actually really important in education, and I think like is kind of being lost in our age of AI. You know, like you, the struggle is part of the learning process. You got to kind of like really struggle with these readings to grasp them. So as you're doing that, as you're struggling with the reading, I encourage you to come back to this summary. The editors have done a nice job of like basically summarizing these readings and giving you like a touchstone for that. We're about to almost at the end of our time. I wanted to check in with those of you who are here in the live session to see if you had any questions, thoughts, things that I can help clarify further in these last few minutes. Okay, I will take that as a no. Um, just looking over the end of this, and I mean, it's essentially saying what I said earlier about like rational action models being more like what economists do when they're trying to explain our economic behavior, why we buy things the way we do, or why we choose certain kinds of careers. Um, Economics is really big on the rational actor model because a lot of times when it comes to economic stuff, we do act in that kind of like rational actor kind of way when we're buying a car or we're choosing a career or we're deciding whether to take a job or not or we're deciding like whether to save our money or spend our money. Those are all like things where the like the rational logical pros and cons part of our brain turns on. So it's not that those rational actor models are necessarily wrong. It's that they have limited reach in terms of what they can explain in social life. They can explain very well people's economic behavior, but they cannot really explain very well other aspects of people's lives, like, say, religion or family, which are typically based more on like emotional or affective connections that people have rather than their economic, self-interested, maximizing rational behavior. So this is essentially what is being discussed here in the summary and conclusion. So in the next class, we will look at the reading itself, the text itself, on structuration and the new rules of sociological method. In the meantime, I will say goodbye and wish you a good day. Thank you to those of you who participated in our discussion and in the poll, which I thought was especially kind of a highlight of the class, talking about your responses to the poll questions. Thought that was really good, and I'll try to cook up another poll to give us for the next class. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to stop the share, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Yeah, bye
Bye.
bye. Yeah. Hi, Ravi.